The following podcast is part of the MindBodySpirit.fm podcast network.
Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
With Uber Reserve, you can book your Uber ride in advance, 90 days in advance. Perfect for all you forward thinkers and planning gurus. Reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. Uber Reserve. See Uber app for details.
Wholeness means to me being in a state of joy.
Wholeness means feeling complete, owning my authentic gifts.
Wholeness is really connected. Everything is connected to everything.
Wholeness is where we have access to all parts of ourselves.
This is a kind of an interesting episode. It came because for the last few months, this idea of a witch, or women claiming that as their title and owning that and wanting to use that word, was just kind of showing up in my circles. And I recognized that I was having a reaction to it. And I'm familiar with this reaction. Usually what I've learned the hard way is that it's actually inviting me to do some investigating. And it's really easy for me at that point, when I feel that discomfort, to lean into my biases, to double down on what I feel like I already know and stay there. And that's a safe place. But because of circumstances I've been through, and that just didn't work in some cases, and I found that it's actually beneficial to move into that feeling and discover my own biases and to learn from the people and from their point of view rather than from my point of view. So that's what this was about for me, was just some investigation about this term witch and how that feels like it's changing in this point in time. And witches have long fascinated humanity. Their images evolved from being fearful and folklore to complex characters in modern media. It was amazing how, as I was studying, it showed up a lot of places. From ancient history to modern films, the figure of the witch has symbolized power, fear, wisdom, and independence. However, much of what we believe about witches is rooted in misunderstandings, distorted myths, and historical prejudices. And that's what I came to find out as I talked to women about this. I hope you'll come with me on this journey. And as I talked to a couple of women and watched documentaries and remembered Bewitched, such an innocent show, or Good Witch on the Hallmark Channel, I realized that there was such an array of examples given about this idea of the witch, but some in my world, I guess, stuck a little harder, and those ones were more negative for whatever reason. And that's kind of changed for me. I kind of really respect that these women have, when I asked them why and what, I understood what they were saying. I'm so grateful to Sandra from Australia and Courtney from the US to share with me and be willing to teach me and guide me and inform me on this journey. The first question that I wanted to ask was, how do you define the idea of witch? And here's what their answers were.
It seems to come from the Old English word, which was spelt W-I-C-C-A for the masculine and W-I-C-C-E for the feminine, which is pronounced in Old English as witcher.
Mm.
And the meaning behind that seems to be to bend or to bind. So that seems to be where it's come from. And the modern spelling of the name seemed to come during the Christian era. So that seems to be as far as I've been able to determine where it came from. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
But it meant sorcerer or people who can bend and shape reality. But the bending is both active and passive at the same time. So when you're doing magic, you might be putting your intent out there, but you have to also bend to surrender to how the universe brings that to you. So the bending goes both ways.
I feel like it gets a huge misconception. And I think when we think of witch, and when someone says, I'm a witch, most people, I think, are like, oh, so you're Wicca, or they say, so you're Wiccan. And I'm like, well, no, that's kind of an organizational sort of a dogma of witchcraft, and, you know, maybe more like a religion. People that maybe don't know what Wicca is, and I don't even really totally know, because I've only just kind of looked into it, like in discovering what are my spiritual beliefs, how do I feel that the ways of the world work, and you know, I looked at Wicca and like, what is this, what, you know, how did this come about, and deciding just a little bit into it that like, oh, that's not really for me, that's not really how I choose to practice. But you know, have no issues with the way that they choose to see the world. In fact, I agree with a lot of it in the way that it's connected to paganism and love of land and natural things in the universe. What is a spell? What is it when I'm making a spell or when I'm making magic? I'm creating a ritual. I'm using words to express what it is I want, or what it is I'm grateful for, or whatever it is that I'm connecting with. I need to have three things: the will, the words, and the way.
A couple of years ago, I was feeling really low in the winter. And so I was kind of researching on YouTube, and I found this YouTube video that talked about, you know, in ancient times and how, you know, it was talking about how Christmas time, that orange was always part of Christmas. And it was kind of the history about that, and how they used to take the orange and slice it and dry it, and you could hang it in your windows, and it was representative of the sun. And it was something that just really spoke to me. And I chose to do it that winter during those dark and kind of isolating times. And it was really helpful. A couple of years went by before I knew that that was a practice of many witches. It was a pagan practice. And I thought that was fascinating. And I was really, you know, uninformed and had some misconceptions. So I asked these two women again about the misconceptions, particularly with Satanism, like that they were related. We had heard a little bit about that from Courtney, but I really wanted to ask more about that as well. So these are some of the misconceptions that these two women shared with me.
That, you know, witches are dangerous. They're always going to be out to curse you, that kind of thing. I mean, you still get people cracking jokes about that.
Yes.
Which isn't true. I think most witches out there are aware that what you put out comes back to you. So what you put out energetically will always come back to you, because the universe is mirroring you. So it's better to put out good stuff than the negative stuff. And when if you are cursing or hexing, you're vibrating at a very low level of energy. You've got to take yourself down into resentment. You've got to take yourself down into anger. And you've got to be there emotionally vibrating at that energy. So what do you think happens when you do that? Well, you start attracting more of that stuff and more of the stuff that you get angry about, more of the stuff you're going to get resentful about and revengeful about. So it's self-defeating to do that, yet it is still practiced with some people who prefer the darker side of it. They will still do that and wonder why their lives wondering why their lives can be a bit of a mess, and there's a lot of conflict that they have to deal with. There are people who work within a satanic context who might call themselves witches. I know that there's people that work within the Luciferian traditions that call themselves witches, but that whole connection of witchcraft with Satanism came around in the Middle Ages. So that's something that's evolved out of Christianity. It's not something that was there prior to Christianity, because prior to Christianity, there was no Satan. So traditionally, it's got nothing to do with Satanism or Christianity. It's purely pagan, going back to the old times when you'd have earth deities, sky deities, and working with basically manifestations of the natural forces in a deity kind of feel. So the sun was Helios, and, you know, the earth is Gaia, that kind of thing. It's got nothing to do with the whole Judaic Abrahamic concept of good and evil, and nothing to do with the Abrahamic concept of Satan.
But yeah, a lot of misconceptions are like, oh, that is associated with the devil and with people who have been raised their whole life to believe that
there is something really fearful, something to fear about, Satan's always trying to get you. Satan's always trying to tempt you. You better be careful. So I think a lot of people hear witch, or they see a lot of what witchcraft is, and they just jump to fear about all of it. And I'll use the pentagram as an example. A lot of people, when they see a pentagram or someone draws a pentagram, and they're like, oh, devil magic, dark magic. I mean, they go right to that thought, right? That's the connotation that they get. When you really learn more about it and the symbolism behind it, it's a symbol of protection. It's a symbol of, for some people like me, Celtic inspiration or Celtic come from. It's the same as the seeds in the apple. When you cut an apple the short way, you get the star, right?
Yep.
And those 5 elements that it represents. So it's kind of calling those elements into play. It's just, I mean, for a lot of people, every religion and every culture has symbols that hold power. And I like the scene in the movie Practical Magic when he's talking about the star of the sheriff's star, and she's like, does this symbol hold power for you? And it holds power because you believe it does, right? It's not that the star has the power.
Right.
And that is the way I understand witchcraft. That's how I understand magic in the way that it really is. It's not that the things have power. It's what energy we relate with it. And then I started really doing research on witch trials, the history of what witches were to a lot of people throughout history. And my definition has changed quite a bit. So I call myself a witch because I do healing work.
I had heard all about and done with clients and done for myself this thing called cord cutting. And one day I saw the word spell used in that kind of ritual, and I'd never thought about that. So I, again, was curious what the difference was or what that was like. How did that show up? Why and how was that different? I asked Sandra and Courtney to kind of give me a glimpse into how this shows up in their life. And then when they're working with clients, what is that like? Give me a little bit of how it looks.
So the craft is witchcraft or Wicca.
Okay.
So that is mentoring for people who are particularly interested in that as their path, and they want to work within that path. So they want to do maybe rituals, they might want to do some spell work as well as inner work. So you can combine the ritual side of things with the letting go of the beliefs and also bringing in the things that you want. So working on that law of attraction manifestation side of things. So it's a bit broader than just doing the coaching where I help people release their negative beliefs. It's just very general. I use EFT tapping to do that. And Reiki, of course, is Reiki. It's channeling that universal energy through into them for various different types of healing. So it depends what people are wanting.
For some of us that have lived maybe a more urban lifestyle, for me, it's just about my garden outside or the plants right in my yard, which I'm like, listen, I go out there and I just maybe take my hair and I say, thank you so much for being you and plant, being beautiful and whatever that plant does for me. And then I just sprinkle some of my hair as an offering, just any simple little thing. We talk about how ritual can be so simple and just something that says, I noticed, I'm honoring you, and living our lives with more of that
gratitude and mindfulness. Yeah. Mindfulness and gratitude for sure.
Yeah. Anybody wanting to dive into more of like, what would it actually look like, or how does it work? Because I feel like, okay, so I call myself a witch, but really that started from me being a healer. I started just wanting to help people, and not everybody has the time to sit and study what I've studied. I'm not any more special than anyone else. I don't have superpowers like anyone else. I want everyone to feel powerful among themselves. So I guess my final thought would be, don't be afraid of somebody who calls himself a witch. Find out what they do. What is their knowledge? What do they offer? Because I'm a folk witch, but I'm also a healer. I'm a Celtic priestess. I am, I understand the ways of energy and how they work. And all I want to do is use what knowledge I've gained and what wisdom I've gained and share it. And like I said, I was uncomfortable at first when people started referring to me a witch. But when I started to learn that my new definition of a witch is a woman who, I heard the acronym, witch just means woman in total control of herself.
Wow. Yeah. Yes.
Which is just, who am I when I'm not mother, sister, daughter, wife, whatever. Okay. You take all the titles that I relate to other people away. Who am I? And when I own that part of myself, then I'm a witch.
Yeah.
And when I realized that that was empowering to me, that meant that, yeah, I was just a woman in control of herself, that has autonomy, that has sovereignty. That's when I was like, darn right, I'm a witch. I am proud of it. I will own that title and I will tell everybody else. And if I call someone else a witch, it's out of high regard and respect for that woman, because it means she's also owning that part of herself.
I think my favorite magic is the inner work magic, the shadow work, as we call it, doing rituals to help bring up beliefs or issues that are causing that stuckness, that pinched off sort of feeling, and seeing them for what they are, and then using rituals to assist in removing those beliefs or perceptions. So I like the inner healing work of magic, and that's mostly the work that I do. I don't do a lot of magic in the more sort of mundane sort of sphere these days. I did when I was younger, but these days it's much more about using ritual and other techniques that also help speak to the subconscious mind and get the subconscious mind involved in the change, because it is the one running the show pretty much 95% of the time. And so it's using ritual as a way to bring it into awareness and also to help it change. I remember one of my very first clients, actually, which was, we were working on tapping on beliefs around money and beliefs around worth and charging their worth. They were a reflexologist, and they were wanting to bring more customers into their business and to basically get over that self-doubt that was in the way. And so as we were working together over a 3-month period, not only did the business start to bring in more customers and clients, and she teamed up with somebody else, but also she had a bunion, I think it was a bunion or a corn or something under her foot, and that disappeared as well. So there was a physical transformation, because we're working on the root chakra particularly because it's to do with money and survival in the world and security in the world. And the feet are very much the root chakra. So as it was cleared and started to heal through releasing all of these beliefs, so did her feet. And she was really amazed by that, because that had been there a long, long time.
Anyone practicing whatever kind of witchcraft looks like, even if they don't call themselves a witch, even if they're just a woman trying to start a business or something like that, I think we're all engaging with it, whether we know it or not, and that we have a lot of power that we can tap into if we know what it is and how to use it. Everybody understands it more than they think they do.
Right.
I think when people tap into their own intuition and when they feel certain things, I have an episode on my podcast where I say, you may be a pagan. And then I go through a list of things, and it's like, have you ever felt awe at a sunset? Have you ever felt the energy of a tree? You know, that you, or maybe you've gained a relationship with a tree because it's been in your yard forever, and you know that tree. You just know it. You don't know how you know it. You don't know. I mean, there's so many ways in which we engage with the natural world that if we stop to really think about it, it's not a religious philosophy. It's not a dogma. It's not doctrine. It's not, I mean, you can be any religion you want to be and still be pagan, because really you're just understanding and engaging with the relationship of the earth, the land, and the natural world. And by the way, tapping into the natural part of yourself, everything that's natural and real about you is part of that journey too, of being like, I embrace the me that is me.
This episode is brought to you by CarMax. Searching for your next car? Don't settle. Thrive. At CarMax, it's easy to shop online or in person. With upfront pricing and tools designed to help, finding a car you love has never been easier. Plus, you can sell or trade in your current vehicle with an online offer in minutes. No strings attached. Start shopping now to find a car you'll love at CarMax.com. CarMax, the way it should be.
This episode is brought to you by Opill, the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill available in the U.S. Opill is FDA approved, full prescription strength, and estrogen-free. Plus, there's no prescription needed. Finally, the days of needing a prescription for birth control are over. Opill is available online and at most major retailers. Take control of your health and reproductive journey with Opill. Birth control in your control. Use code BIRTHCONTROL for 25% off your first month of Opill at Opill.com.
Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
So you're beginning to see the differences and the similarities between the point of views and perspective of these two ladies. So we need to kind of move back in time and just add some of the history. The earliest references to witches came from ancient civilizations such as Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks. These societies believed in a magic and witchcraft as forces that could help affect the natural world. Witches, often women, were seen as intermediaries who could wield both good and bad supernatural powers. In ancient Egypt, for example, some witches served as healers, using herbal remedies and spells to protect people from illness and evil spirits. In medieval Europe, however, witches became linked to heresy and devil worship, in part due to the rise of Christianity. This shift turned what was once a revered practice into something feared and reviled. By the 15th century, the infamous witch hunts and trials began, sparking a widespread paranoia, religious fever, and political motives. In 1487, a manual on how to identify and punish witches fueled the persecution. Tens of thousands, I heard anywhere from 30 to 60,000, mostly women, were executed across Europe and North America during the height of the witch hysteria in the 16th and 17th centuries. And this brings us to what both women referred to as the idea of the witch wound. The witch wound refers to a collective trauma or a deep-seated fear, especially among women, that stems from historical persecution of those accused of witchcraft, particularly during the events like the European witch hunts and the Salem witch trials. This trauma is often passed down through generations. It's a psychological and energetic scar that may affect people's confidence, creativity, and sense of self-worth. Some of the core elements of the witch wound are fear of persecution. Historically, those accused of witchcraft were often healers, midwives, or women who did not conform to societal norms. The fear of being judged, ostracized, or even killed for standing out or being different still lingers in many today, even subconsciously. Even as I read this and as I've studied, I feel that deep inside. I feel those deep inside. And so it's something I'm going to have to look at and work on. Another thing, which again feels familiar, is a fear of being seen. Many people, especially women, carry a fear of fully expressing their gifts, talents, or spiritual abilities because of the historical memory of punishment for doing so. Another element is self-doubt and repression. The witch wound can lead to self-censorship or limiting oneself to avoid being judged or rejected. It can manifest in reluctance to pursue spiritual, creative, or leadership paths due to the fear of being ridiculed or misunderstood. The fourth element is healing and reclamation. And I wonder if this is why I was sent on this journey. I got to think about that. That feels real at this moment. The other element of this witch wound is the healing and reclamation. Healing the witch wound involves reclaiming the power that was historically taken away. This means embracing spiritual gifts, standing in one's truth, and shedding the fear of judgment or persecution. This healing journey often includes shadow work, self-compassion, and community support. Maybe as we get more curious, and with that curiosity, I'm sure will come compassion, maybe we can start to heal this wound. And maybe a witch wound isn't how you would present it, but I wonder if those of you listening can identify with some of those insecurities, some of those blocks, some of those wounds.
It's always like there's this missing link. There's this missing something. And what it feels like is a disconnect. It's disconnection from who we are, and it's our true selves, our power, our freedom, our sovereignty, being who we truly are, away from the doubt and the worrying about what people are going to say or do or think, or what the establishment is going to say, do or think. And I think it's really about our sovereignty and our freedom and taking that back. And that's a really challenging thing, because there's a part of us that's terrified of it, because we've been conditioned to be afraid of it. And so we get to a certain point and we don't want to go any further, yet we still feel pinched off, something's missing.
We have whole discussions about witch wounds and how there's so many different aspects in which it affects us, not just our relationships with other women, but our relationship to our own body and how we feel in that. Like I said, relationship to land, a lot of us have expressed a lot of grief in that our ancient traditions have been lost for the most part because of colonization and because of, you know, the way history plays out. Europe was colonized and then Europeans came here and colonized here. And as a descendant of colonizers, of like that group of people that came here, there is a lot of grief and just and that kind of relates to or leads to why there's cultural appropriation of indigenous peoples' practices. I personally don't sage, for example. A lot of people in the pagan community, they like to sage, they cleanse their house with saging, but that's a practice that belongs to the indigenous people of Northern America. So I prefer to use seining or smoke cleansing. It comes from Nordic practices. You know, and just being able to connect with my ancestral roots, there's a lot of pain in that. The reason why we look to appropriate other cultures, for the most part, is because we've lost so much of our own. So there's a lot of pain and grief in that, in being like, how do I relate here and now where I am, while also connecting and respecting and there's a lot of this in the Braiding Sweetgrass, if you've ever read that book about how to have a relationship with land, and it's written by a woman who is of a Northern American tribe. And when people of my ancestry read it, we have that sense of great deep loss of like, how do I connect with land when my ancestors haven't done that for hundreds of years, and I don't even know how, and I don't know the stories. I don't know the, you know, that mountain range that's outside my house, that has a story behind it that I don't know and isn't necessarily mine. But I come from a land where there are mountain ranges, and that's the story of the Cailleach and the witch who made those mountains from the stones in her apron. And there's stories that come from my people's land. And if I don't connect with that, then there's just that loss and that grief and that pain of like, how do I do that? Where do I begin? So yeah, I think all the joy and passion that this comes from, for me and for a lot of people like me, it comes from the pain. The passion couldn't be there if it wasn't for the pain.
I think too, with some of the more modern things, they're still pushing the witch with the Satan thing here and there. And now when you've got other groups calling themselves witches, like Luciferians referring to themselves necessarily as witches, and it sort of can color people's perception a bit, because there's, I mean, witchcraft's always been something that you can either do good or you can do harm. There's black and white, light and dark, because magic is magic. And so there's always been witches who will do that dark stuff. And that's how it has always been. But in the modern day and age, when we understand so much more about the mind, the way the mind works, we understand more about vibration, we understand more about even how the law of attraction works. When you read books by Lynn McTaggart, Joe Dispenza, you see that spending your time in that energy of negativity and cursing is very, really harmful to ourselves and to our environment. So it's not wise, if witch is supposed to also mean wise, to indulge in that kind of practice.
In a lot of witch or pagan folklore, there's the triple goddess, right? The maiden, the mother, and the crone. But in our society, oftentimes we only value the maiden and the mother, because again, it's about how that woman is in relationship with other people. How does she serve our needs? Does she look pretty? Is she mothering our children?
Right.
I mean, those are useful. But when a woman reaches a certain age, is she no longer useful? And then it transfers into the crone or the hag or the witch, as we typically relate to her. So a lot of Halloween propaganda is kind of coming from that place, where it's like kind of turning that story into, well, this is when women stop being useful to us, is when they start reaching an age where they're now they're like associated with evil. And a lot of times women reach a certain age, you may relate to this, but you reach a certain age where you just don't care that much anymore about what people think of you. Society doesn't like it.
Right.
They want someone who looks and sounds and does what she's supposed to and behaves herself, right?
Right.
So I will say, like, embrace all of it. Embrace the crone, embrace the maiden, embrace the mother. And by the way, all women are all of them. If you believe in a lot of what the people in astrology, people who kind of speak these languages, they're all saying the same thing. These cycles are coming into an awakening. We're all having kind of a spiritual awakening, and it's making us question what we've always known or what we thought we knew about spirituality. Like, maybe God looks different than I thought, or maybe, there is a God, but it's a different kind of thing.
Right.
And
maybe I get to
feminine awakening.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe I get to step into it rather than have it spoken to me. I think that's what I find most in common.
From within.
Right. Right.
In a natural place.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that you ask about why particularly women, and I think that there's a lot of correlation to women coming into their own sovereignty. When you read like the Caliban and the Witch, or I'm in the middle of reading In Defense of Witches, really good books to illustrate why the witch trials. Why did they happen? I mean, we know that like religious things were going on. The Puritans were like really trying to revamp what they believed was righteous way to live life, and so it created a lot of fear. We know about the influence of King James I when he wrote witchcraft demonology books about how to spot a witch, and there was all this kind of campaign rhetoric about being careful. But really, it was a war against women who were just trying to gain some type of autonomy, some type in any way, whether that would be just to speak up for themselves, to support themselves financially. Because most of the women we know now, looking back in history, the peak of the witch trials, it was not women who were practicing any kind of actual witchcraft, what we would call witchcraft today.
Right.
It was women who were speaking up for themselves, or had created a bit of a stir, or they were set to inherit some type of land or money. I mean, they were the poor. They were the women who were like kind of maybe fed up with being poor in some way. And we're like, I'm going to, learn about herbal medicines, or I'm going to engage in midwifery, or some type of trade I can do to earn my own money. And the truth of the matter is, when we look at that in the broader sense, the witch trials going on in Scotland, all over Europe, here in America, we know in like New England, all of those witch trials, there was a common theme, which was there was a bit of a rise in women trying to assert themselves in some way, shape, or form. Our society, built on sort of a capitalist society, that's what we came from when we transferred from like feudalism, went into a capitalist society. Well, the truth is, whether we like it or not, capitalism can't exist without some group being oppressed. There has to be marginalized groups. So people of color and women are often the bottom rung. They get exploited for their cheap labor. When things switched from feudalism to capitalism, that's when duties became gendered. And it was, this work is women's work, this work is men's work. Well, that's all fine and good if everybody is like all okay with that. However, the women's work became just a sort of self-sacrificing, like, you don't get paid for this. You don't actually get to choose what your hopes and dreams are for your future or for your career, but you get to do this women's work for free. I mean, we still see that play out today. That's not, you know, something new. It's not something that's just in our society. It's something that's been happening for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But basically, like, how much is the work that women do really valued? And by value, I mean money. That's the way we show value, right? So work that is predominantly women's work, it's not paid as much. You know, nurses and teachers, those are professions that don't get paid as much. And moms who stay at home and take care of the children and the family in the home, they don't get paid anything for that.
Right.
You see how it all plays a part in the whole thing.
Right.
And so these women, you know, in witch trials, they weren't witches. And, you know, how much of our relationship with each other as women, we're sort of isolated and segregated in today's world because it doesn't benefit the people in power to have women really connected, like really actually working together. So then you create something called witch wounds, which is women who are afraid to get too close to each other. They're afraid of being betrayed. And that's what happened during the witch trials, was there was women accused of witchcraft, and in order to save their own skin, they had to name their sisters, their friends, and to save their own life. And, you know, not that we blame them for that, but it's like it created something that we are generationally having to see the effects of. And do women, are they actually vulnerable and really connect with each other and feel that they can without any fear of, how am I going to get betrayed somehow? And that plays out in so many different relationships among women.
Yeah.
So I don't know any woman that wouldn't agree that during, you know, having a group of friends can be such a blessing. And also it can
a little complicated.
Hard.
Our discussions so far have been from the perspective of a woman. Some reasons for this are that in medieval Europe, the rise of Christianity played a significant role in associating witchcraft with women. The Bible, particularly passages like the story of Eve, contributed to the notion that women were more susceptible to sin and temptation. Church leaders, including theologians like Thomas Aquinas, which is difficult for me to hear, suggested that women were weaker in faith and more easily influenced by the devil. Also, that infamous 1487 text written by two German Dominican monks reinforced the belief that women were more prone to witchcraft than men. It claimed that women were naturally weaker, more lascivious, and more likely to make pacts with the devil. The book became a central guide for witch hunters during the European witch trials. And like Courtney brought up, many societies throughout history have been patriarchal, with men holding power over women. Women, especially those who did not conform to traditional roles, such as the unmarried women, the widows, or the healers, were often viewed with suspicion. They were more vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft, as they were seen as a threat, quote, to the social order. Women were also healers or midwives in their communities, using herbs and knowledge passed down from generation to generation. This association with nature and healing made them targets when things went wrong, like plagues or bad harvests. As they practiced what was seen as folk medicine, their skills were sometimes interpreted as witchcraft. So you can see how it was like a double-edged sword. They wanted them and they needed their practices, but when it went bad, they were kind of the ones to blame. But in recent years, the image of the witch has been reclaimed by many women as a symbol of empowerment. The witch, once feared for her independence and power, is now often seen as a feminist icon representing strength, autonomy, and resistance to patriarchal control. But what about men? Where did they belong here? Where is their story here? So I asked, what would you call a male witch?
A witch. That's a question I get asked a lot, especially by males, because the female witch is pushed so much and has been pushed for a very, very long time. But there are male witches for sure, and they call themselves witches. Although in modern times, some of them are looking for other terms because they're feeling that they're not allowed to call themselves a witch. I don't know. I mean, that shouldn't be the case. Gerald Gardner, who was the first person to bring witchcraft out into the public sphere, Gerald Gardner was a male and he called himself a witch, and so did all of the other ones after him through the decades. So I don't see any reason why men have to try and find another term. Some use the word warlock, but warlock's a Scottish word which means liar, so I probably wouldn't like to choose that one.
So some people might use the word wizard, which
some people use wizard, but when I think of wizards, I kind of think of like Gandalf or something that's more fictitious. That's
right.
rather than an actual practice.
So I've never thought about that. That probably is more of a fictitious type character.
I haven't heard the word wizard in any historical sense. I haven't come across it yet. If anybody has, then that would be good to know where that actually originated from.
I asked people what would be the male version, and they were like, maybe a wizard. And I just thought, that's interesting because we love the wizards. Like, you think of a wizard as like all-knowing and powerful and fun and like something you want to move towards. And then you've got this witch who is just the female version, and maybe people like maybe step back a bit. And I just thought that was really interesting.
Wizard sounds amazing, right?
Right.
I mean, in Welsh culture, there was a far less witch trials during all the time when Europe was crazy with witch trials. And that was because they don't have a word for witch in Wales. They call them swinraig if it's a woman, but it's kind of like men and women. Their words for it was just cunning man, cunning woman.
Oh, interesting.
There's someone who knows about magical practices. And they were actually very revered in their culture. If they had cattle dying or crops failing, they didn't blame witches as much. Instead, they decided it was the fairies that were causing problems. And you need a cunning man or a cunning woman to counteract the spells. You need somebody to give you some magic so that you can hang a horseshoe above your door or whatever it is they recommend you do to ward off the magic. The fairies they're always causing mischief, those fairies, So that's such a different cultural come from to me. That's more why I subscribe to the Celtic way of things. Is the Welsh Celtic come from is more of with respect to people who can practice magic. And so maybe just consider, how culturally we relate to that. Is like, why are we so like, yeah, wizards are great. We love Harry Potter. He's a wizard.
Yeah.
But when you call someone a witch, it's like,
scary, it's like scary.
Something that I really identified with in this journey of discovering more about the witch was the way they use earth and earth elements. The connection between the witches and earth elements is deeply rooted in ancient traditions, folklore, and practices associated with magic, healing, and spirituality. Many witches, both in historical contexts and modern practices, are seen as being in tune with nature, particularly the classic elements of earth, air, fire, and water, with earth often being the foundational one. And historically, witches were often healers and midwives who used herbs and roots and other plants to create remedies for various ailments. Their deep knowledge of the Earth's flora and fauna made them essential members of their community. Also, the earth element represents the physical world and stability and growth and fertility, and witches were seen as closely connected to these natural cycles, embodying a deep respect for nature's rhythms. Practices like planting by the moon phases or understanding the cycles of seasons align with the idea of working harmoniously with the earth. In modern times, many witches, particularly those practicing forms of neo-paganism like Wicca, see themselves as protectors of the earth. Environmental activism, sustainability, and conservation efforts are often incorporated into these spiritual practices. Earth magic, a form of spell work that draws on the energy of the land, plants, and stones, is often used to promote healing for both individuals and the planet. Both Sandra and Courtney spoke of the earth and its elements as vital to their practice.
So we utilize the earth in our ritual. So we work with the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, water, and it depends on the background. We have different backgrounds. People are coming more from a shamanic background. Others are coming more from a Western esoteric background. So often when we're working with the elements, we'll be feeling into the energy of fire. So we might imagine there's a fire there in the fire quarter, and feeling the heat of the fire, the strength of the fire. If we're working with the earth element, we'll be connecting to maybe mountains or the land. And a lot of our practices are going out in nature and feeling the earth underneath our feet and bringing up the energy from the earth into our bodies. And also working with earth spirits, natural spiritual forces of the earth, the plant spirits, animal spirits, and connecting with it on that sort of spiritual, energetic side of things, as well as also growing things. A lot of witches like to grow herbs and veggies and cook and all of that sort of thing as well.
For me, personally, I mean, especially when people in my community who call themselves witches, it's about rediscovering our relationship with the land. That is probably one of the more direct threads that everybody can kind of relate to. It's sort of like, what were my ancient ancestors' relationship with the land that they were on, and reconnecting with some of us that are Northern European ancestry, trying to understand, how do I connect with the land I'm on now, which is not my indigenous, I'm not indigenous to this land, but how do I have relationship with this land and the homeland in which my ancestors came from and where they were buried. And the folklore, the traditions, the spiritual practices, everything that comes with that.
I hope you've been open to learning something new from these 2 women. I identified with so much and wondered why I hadn't researched witches before. I realized I had so many assumptions. I loved Courtney's definition, WITCH, woman in total control of herself. I like that. The image of the typical witch with a pointed hat and a broomstick is a modern construct. It was popularized in part by the 19th century art and literature. The idea of witches flying on broomsticks is thought to be linked to folk rituals, where certain herbs were used that could induce hallucinogenic experiences, giving rise to the belief that witches could fly. You never know where these come from. One of the most iconic portrayals of a witch is the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, played by Margaret Hamilton. This character embodies many of the negative stereotypes of witches. She's ugly, she's vengeful, and she's obsessed with power. This portrayal solidified the image of witches as antagonistic forces in popular culture, particularly in children's stories. Similarly, Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs features an evil queen who uses witchcraft to become a terrifying old hag, reinforcing the idea that witchcraft is synonymous with deception and malice, and again, that ugly, mean, old woman. However, witches have also come to symbolize empowerment and rebellion against patriarchal norms. In the 1996 film The Craft, for instance, 4 teenage girls use witchcraft to reclaim control over their lives and confront the societal pressures they face. The movie portrays witchcraft as both a means of empowerment and a dangerous tool, with the characters grappling with the consequences of their newfound power. Another more complex portrayal is in Charmed, a television show that ran from 1998 to 2006 that followed three sisters who discovered they are powerful witches. Instead of being evil, these witches are protectors of humanity, using their powers to fight evil forces. Charmed showcases witches as multidimensional, capable of both good and bad, and portrays witchcraft as something to be embraced and honed rather than feared. While witches are often depicted as dark and mysterious, some portrayals have taken a more lighthearted approach. Sabrina, the Teenage Witch from a television show from 1996 to 2003, portrayed Sabrina as a relatable high school girl learning to navigate her magical powers. The show took a comedic approach to witchcraft, focusing on family relationships and the challenges of adolescence. And the Hallmark Channel's Good Witch, which I have been binging throughout this journey, portrays Cassie as a wise, kind, intuitive, and not so quite called out as a witch, even though it's called Good Witch, who seems to have a fix for everyone's problems. If you haven't seen any of those movies, Good Witch or the 8-season show, you must. It will make you wish you were a witch, for sure. In preparation for this episode, one of the documentaries I watched was called The Witches of Hollywood, and it's on Amazon Prime. And they walked me through the arc of witches in media. As witches continue to be reimagined in films, books, and television, their portrayals will likely continue to reflect societal's evolving attitudes towards things like gender, power, the supernatural. Whether as villains, heroes, or something in between, it goes along with how society is going to affect them, or judge them, or portray them. I think it would do us all well to find balance in the way we view others, regardless of the vocabulary word they wish to define themselves as. Wholeness is about embracing all of who we are, and I loved the way Sandra defined wholeness for us.
It sort of gives me an image of something that contains the whole of everything or everything. So it's about balance on one hand, so balancing things in our lives, which is something that I'm focusing on at the moment with the equinox coming up particularly, which is all about balance. And trying to remember that we're here to create, we're here to make things better in the world. And that wholeness is about embracing balance, I think, more than anything, and looking at places within ourselves or really within ourselves first that need that balance. And achieving wholeness means having a sense of balance, a sense of peace. I think the inner peace is a big thing.
When most people are asked what they want, they will answer, I want to be happy. But happy takes practice. And that's what the Wholeness Library is all about. So check it out free at thewholenessnetwork.com.
If you're inspired by the teachings of Dr. Wayne Dyer, you will love the Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life podcast with Nadia Dela Cruz.
You are a spiritual being having a human experience. My name is Nadia Dela Cruz, and I started the Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life podcast to explore spiritual topics like manifestation and meditation with guests who share their own stories of insight, awakening, and transformation. Listen now on the mindbodyspirit.fm podcast network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Have you ever wondered about life after death, or if it's possible to connect with loved ones on the other side? I'm Suzanne Giesman, and I'm a medium, author, and spiritual teacher. Join me on my podcast, Messages of Hope, where it's my mission to teach you how to live a consciously connected and divinely guided life. I'll share with you proven methods that anyone can use to connect with all levels of consciousness. Listen here on the mindbodyspirit.fm podcast network.